All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? It's a little after 9 o'clock. Thank you all for joining us this morning for our Rise with Ice Miller and Friends webcast. I'm Christina Fugate, and I'm joined here with my Ice Miller partner, Alice Kelly. Alice and I lead our firm's franchise practice, and we're really excited to have here with us Wayne Patrick and Sean Thomas, and we're going to be talking a lot about franchising today, so we're really excited about that. For those of you who haven't joined us before, our Rise series is designed to share the stories of success of our Ice Miller friends and to talk about issues that we're all facing in today's world. If you hadn't had a chance to join us before, you can catch all of our prior webcasts on our franchise webpage for Ice Miller. So go ahead and check those out. We've had some really fun interviews. We're trying a little bit of a different format today. If you want to, you can turn your camera on. You can certainly keep it off as well, but we want to make this an engaging conversation, so we encourage people to ask questions throughout. We do have a chat and question box on your screen. You can input questions there, or if you want to turn your audio on, you can ask questions verbally as well. So we're excited to try out this new format. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Alice to introduce herself and to talk about our drawing and our first polling question.
Thanks, Christina. As she said, I'm Alice Kelly. I'm a partner in the Chicago office, and we are so glad to have you all here. As per usual, we have a drawing at the end, which will be from Fresh Stack in Chicago for our Chicago people, as well as Marco's Pizza in Indy for our Indy-based people. And why we picked those two will become apparent soon. But we're going to do our first poll, which is coffee, tea, or other when you get up in the morning. Personally, for me, coffee.
I am also a coffee drinker. I have now become a 2-time-a-day coffee drinker. All right, so here, as I mentioned, we've got Wayne and Sean, and I'll let them introduce themselves in more detail, but just briefly, Wayne Patrick is the Chief Revenue Officer for AIS LLP, and he was the Central Indiana area representative for a national pizza chain. Sean is the managing partner and co-founder of Fresh Stack Burger Company. We're excited to hear more about that. And he's also the grandson of Wendy's founder, Dave Thomas. So I'm going to turn it over to both of you guys to give a more thorough introduction of yourselves. And Wayne, do you want to start first?
Sure, that'd be fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Ice Miller for giving us this opportunity, or at least giving me this opportunity to be a part of this discussion. I'm definitely looking forward to it and interfacing with everyone, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So as you can probably tell by the stuff here, I'm an old guy. As Christina said, I'm primarily a tech guy. I have been in the tech space in place for about 40 years, but about 15 years or so ago, I took what I call my walk on the wild side and got into the restaurant and franchising world. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on. As I already said, I was, along with my brother, the territory area manager for Marco's Pizza. And we'll come back and talk about that in a little more detail as well. And since then, I have developed a consulting relationship with an organization called Pivotal Growth Partners, which is a restaurant and franchise consulting group that is headed up by the former president of Marco's Pizza. Along the way, I had 3 entrepreneurial endeavors on my own outside the restaurant world, 2 successful, 1 not successful, and that's the one I learned the most from. So I'll stop there and hand it over to Sean.
Thanks, Wayne.
Kevin gave it. Hold on one second. Let me just. Oh no, wait.
Christina, Alice, and Kim wanted to say thank you for setting this all up and inviting myself and Wayne on this series. A little bit about myself. I'm the co-founder and operating partner of Fresh Stack Burger. Fresh Stack is a new concept that we launched in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. We're focused on making American classics, all made to order, fresher ingredients. With I guess a chef twist onto the food. We're positioning ourselves next to the Five Guys of the world, the Shake Shacks. So it's a little bit higher price point, but we feel like our differentiating factor is more driven, not necessarily around the food, although the food is good, and we do have a celebrity chef that helped craft the menu items. But our differentiating factor is more centralized around the experience. So I don't know if you've ever checked out our concept online or anybody's ever been there, but when you walk in, it's more of a like a lake house vibe what we're trying to go for. So big high white ceilings, a lot of natural light. We have like good vibe music going on. Um, Live plant wall that's pretty unique. So we're trying to encourage our guests to hang out longer in the space and feel more welcome. So more of a coffee house vibe meets a burger concept, and we have some beer and some wine that encourages people to hang out longer there. So we launched that concept about a year and a half ago. So obviously a lot of challenges that COVID brought forth, but what doesn't kill you, I guess, makes you stronger. And we, through everything, we were able to be, pretty successful and turn a profit and really turn a corner. So we're at a point now where we're really trying to grow the brand internally with company-owned stores, and then also we're starting to dabble into the franchising world. So we just finished our FDD and went through that whole process, and have quite a few leads that we're trying to manage through, and hopefully get some qualified franchisees on board here in the next 12 to 18 months.
Hey, Sean, I'm sorry.
Yep.
What was the name of it again?
It's called Fresh Stack.
Fresh Stacked. Okay. Thank you.
Yep, no problem. Prior to Fresh Stack, I started my career working for my family. So, as I mentioned in the opening statement, my grandfather is the founder of Wendy's. So, burgers and the fast food is in my blood. I got my first job at one of our family franchise stores when I was 13 years old, mopping the floors and working as a crew member. And so I fell in love with the industry then and there. My family, my dad, my grandfather were very encouraging for everybody in the family to go off and find their passion, whatever it was. So I didn't have to get stuck in the fast food business, but just coincidentally, my passion is food. So spent, the better part of 10 years on and off working for the family business in different capacities, from, as I mentioned, crew member to management to operations, research and development, and then moved to Chicago, where I took a job with Let Us Entertain You, just kind of furthering my knowledge of the industry and getting a different perspective and a different side of the industry. Mine being very fast casual heavy. I wanted to get more of a full service, experiential driven, educational background. So worked for them for a couple of years, and then went off and started my first entrepreneurial venture, which happened to be wine. So my business partner and I, we started that in 2012, 2013. And over the 7-8 years that we had the company, we grew the brand into distribution in about 26 states. And then once we exited that company, that's kind of when we started Fresh Stack, and here we are today.
That's great. That's a great story. And Sean, we're going to come back to you to talk a little bit more about why food is your passion. But Wayne, do you want to talk a little bit, briefly, you mentioned about getting into the Marco's Pizza business, but tell us about how, you chose to get into the franchise industry and why franchising?
Well, actually, that's an interesting story, and there's multiple layers. I have a brother, and you heard me mention that earlier, who has been in the franchise world his entire life. Sorry, Sean, but he was a McDonald's guy most of his career. And he had 10 or 12 McDonald's, and then he got out of that, and he still didn't go to the right side. He went to Burger King. And he had been very successful and retired. And I got a phone call from him one day, and I was midstream in my second tech entrepreneurial activity. And he said to me, the franchise rights for Marco's Pizza territory for Central Indiana are available. You and me should buy it. Well, my response was, why the heck would I do that? Because what I know about restaurants will, maybe fill a thimble. Well, his response was, you don't have to know anything. I do. I'll be the operations. I just need you for local support, local contacts, and insight. I said, well, problem there is you live in California. He said, I'll move there. Well, of course, what that meant was he flew in on Sunday and flew out on Thursday. And I still had the bulk of it fall on me. So we bought into the franchise for Marco's Pizza. And the reason I did that was twofold. Number one, Marco's was early stage and what I'm going to call a 10-year-old startup. It was an organization that had been started in Detroit by a guy who had grown it to 200 personally owned, family owned corporate stores. And he had sold out to a group that wanted to take it bigger and broader and build out the franchise. And they had gone through a process and looked at, the processes, the branding and operations and the quality and all of those things, and decided that this was one that made good sense. And so from the perspective of getting in at the right time, it made good sense because we're coming in on the ground floor of that, what I would like to call lift and shift from the corporate store to the franchise world. And we'd have the opportunity to have some influence on that process as well. The second thing for me was that I mentioned I've been a tech guy most of my career. And at that point in time, a whole bunch of the tech stuff was being outsourced and pushed offshore and overseas. And I was looking for a second revenue stream that I could have in my portfolio that could not be outsourced. And I said, you cannot outsource eating. You got to have that here. So this is something that's stable and will make sense for me for the long term. So got into that business along with my brother. And it was very, very interesting, exciting going through the startup and the ramp up process there. In terms of a model, our model was 65% carry out from the store, 35% delivery. We were not a destination restaurant. And we'll probably come back to that a little bit later on if we talk about, what happened to us during COVID and those kinds of things. But I really liked that model, and it made sense from a positioning standpoint. We tried to position ourselves between the low end, if you want to call it that, or the commodity approach. We didn't try to be everyone's pizza. We tried to fit in between the commodity purchase and the high-end destination restaurant and compete with them on the basis of quality ingredients, never frozen, and we targeted demographically folks who were two-family households where they wanted good food, willing to pay a little extra for good food, but didn't have the time necessarily to put into doing that kind of stuff every day. So that's kind of how I got into the fast food and franchise world and the restaurant world.
That's great. And those are really good and interesting stories from both of you of how you got into franchising. Alice, I think you're up next with our next poll.
Sure, it looks like most of us are coffee drinkers, so glad to hear it. Our next poll is, who are you and what do you do? It's a little limited on the options, but let us know who you are. And our next question, gentlemen, is franchising is a business model to grow and include any industry. I would think we kind of touched on it, but why food in particular? Like, what made you, we heard, Wayne, it was your brother who pushed you into it, but I'm curious about building that model. Like, what was it about food that made you stay in that industry?
So is that to me or is that to Sean?
We'll start with you, Wayne, and then Sean, tell us how you found out that after being in a family of hamburger makers, you decided to get back to it.
Well, I already talked a little bit about the motivation from the perspective of you couldn't outsource it, and I knew it was something that was not going to go away. But the thing that I found and that I like in the restaurant world, and it's probably true of most businesses, is that once you got into the restaurant business, it became about, at least for me, the experience with your customer. It was not so much about making the money, although that is important. But what it came about was having that relationship and that experience with your customer where you recognize, you understood what was important to them, what they valued, what they liked, and what were the things that you needed to be doing to give them the right experience and satisfy them when you had that interface with them. And I really liked the response and the feeling and the actual relationship that you develop with folks, because we all know what you find out is there's all kinds of different tastes out there, and you just have to find the folks whose taste agrees with yours and who like the product that you deliver and you develop, and then you develop that relationship with them and it grows. So that's what it was for me, was seeing that customer be satisfied, being that customer be happy and come back to you again and again, over and over, because you were delivering an experience for them that made them happy.
I love that. I've worked at many restaurants. And in fact, I was at Dinkle's getting pastries for my mom's assisted living. And I think they're a local bakery, and they just have that vibe of just people coming every day who come, return and return. And everyone's so excited when you bring that product. I think that's the upside of the restaurant industry. Sean, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, aside from, being born into the industry and, I guess falling more in love with it, the more I was exposed to it. Obviously from a business standpoint, it can be very rewarding. It is a controllable business, so just controlling your costs and, it's an operational company, so it can be very rewarding on that front. But more, I guess the, more value driven reason would be I like the fact of the team building. And food is for most folks, especially fast food, an entry level job. So it's an opportunity for us to help grow younger folks, in their teens, instill like work ethic, values, and kind of get them ready for the next step. So it's not only being business, but also being able to kind of teach and educate and mentor some of the younger kids and instill good work habits. I like that. And then, as Wayne kind of alluded to, just developing relationships with guests. It's a very rewarding industry, and a lot of the people that I've had experiences with, either at Wendy's or Let Us Entertain You or Fresh Stack. I have customers that have turned into friends. So it's really rewarding on that front. And then the amount of work that goes into it, it is a lot of hard work. So there is a sense of self-fulfillment, at the end of a long work day, and you're like, I feel like I accomplished something today. So yeah.
That's great. And, both of you have accomplished a lot so far in your career, but I'm curious, what sort of challenges have you faced? All of us have had challenges recently with COVID, but let's talk a little bit about some of those challenges in your career. And Sean, I'll turn it to you first.
Sure. I mean, obviously when you say challenges, my head goes right to COVID, because it's, who knows what's going to happen with this new Delta stuff. But yeah, I mean, COVID obviously brought a lot of challenges, but as an optimist, I always look at the silver lining in everything. So although it was super challenging for all restaurants, ourselves, opening a restaurant there, having employees catch COVID, having to shut down, having to be responsible, but also, responsible to our investors. It was really challenging, but I think the one silver lining that I'll take away from it is the operational efficiencies that it allowed us to discover. A lot of restaurants that, can, I guess, hit their numbers and their meeting projections and the P&L looks good. That's all great and dandy, but there's typically a lot of fat on that P&L. So when you can kind of expose that, you don't have the opportunity, the luxury to have that fat. It just, I think, makes for a leaner operation, and a more efficient operation, and meaning more profitability and whatnot. But I mean, that's like obviously the immediate challenges, and as entrepreneurs, like it's every day is putting out issues and fires and challenges. So it's looking at those and then discussing it with a team, allowing them to have their input, and then coming to a decision how we're going to move past that. So too many to name, but the one that comes to mind is certainly centered around COVID, at least right now.
Absolutely. Wayne, what about you?
Well, I certainly agree with everything that Sean said, particularly around the silver lining in terms of finding out your operational efficiencies during the COVID process. But I'll go back to 2008, which was probably the most challenging time that we went through because COVID actually turned out to be a really good time for us. But in 2008, we were about a year into our launch and we're in fast growth mode trying to establish restaurants. And what I'll say here is cash is king, right? And so it was extremely hard at that point in time to raise money, to get loans, and get the capital to keep the thing going and keep the thing moving. And so we had to become creative in the way in which we did the funding of our restaurants because banks at that time, 2008, 2009, just were not loaning money, period. In fact, we had banks who told us, if you want to borrow $1 million, you keep $1 million in your account in the bank and we'll loan you $1 million. Well, if I got the $1 million in the account, what the heck am I going to get the loan for? At any rate, so we came up with some creative ways to do financing. They're pretty common, I think, or used in the tech world quite a bit. But we hadn't done that yet in the restaurant world. We put together pools of people, multiple individuals who put in, small amounts. And we chose to go the route of working with professional athletes because we had a lot of contacts in that space in place. And we worked with professional athletes who, they weren't Peyton Manning, they weren't Tom Brady, they didn't make $189,000 million, right? And they needed to have some money after that 8 or 10 year run for the average professional player to sustain them going forward. And so we began working with that player who made good money, nice money, but didn't have enough to get to the end of life. And we put them in pools, we pooled the funds, and we were able to grow that way. So the biggest challenge for us along that time frame was capital, which certainly is not surprising.
So curious, Wayne, so this model that you put together using the athletes and pulling that money, is that more common now?
Absolutely. In fact, we're doing a deal like that right now in a franchise world outside of restaurant. And talk about it a little bit later if you like, but certainly that is definitely a lot more common now. There are a lot more folks doing that. It's more acceptable.
That's great. Well, before we leave this topic on the challenges, I have a question for both of you. And, any advice for those that are wanting to get into the restaurant industry or get into the franchising world? Sean, do you have any advice?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a lot of work that goes into restaurants and into franchising. So to be in that mental space and to be prepared to take on the amount of effort in order to succeed, I'd say is step one. Step two would be to get a good team centered around yourself, operations team. If it's franchising, most franchisors take care of some of that marketing stuff, but just a good support team that can take a lot of the burden and the time commitment off of just one person's shoulder.
Absolutely. I like everything that Sean said there, and I'd add a couple things to it. And I'd come back to Sean and say, do what Sean did if you can. Work for somebody else in the industry first, learn it, understand it, know the rules, know how it operates before you jump out and try to do it individually on your own. Have that experience coming in so you somewhat know what to expect and what is coming at you, because that way you are prepared for those issues and those challenges that come along that Sean's been talking about all along. And then I think the other, and this is probably true for going into any business, is think about where you want to end up. I'm a firm believer in begin with the end in mind. What's the goal, where you want to be, what you're trying to get out of this? And then when you come into this activity, come into the restaurant franchising world, you come into it with that goal in mind and you build out a strategy and a plan that helps you get to that end goal and that end game, because you know where you're going. And then the last thing I'll say, for me, I think need to recognize, back to Sean again, it's tough work. It's really hard. And I believe that if you're going to go into it and get the kind of rewards that you think you want to get out of it, you should go into it with the idea of, I'm going to do more than one of these. If I have one story, it's a lifestyle. Okay. If I really want to get the wealth accumulation, the value, the benefit, I think you should go into it with the idea and the concept in mind of, I'm going to do more than a store, which leads back to building that team that Sean talked about that enables you to do that, to scale and support all of that. So.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. We're curious, do you have any mentors along the way who helped you get to where you are today?
Sean?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Obviously my grandfather is probably the most influential person in my life, especially being one of the more prominent, I guess, figureheads in this industry. But I also have a lot of indirect mentors, people that I don't necessarily know, but I do look up to their philosophies and have, read their books and really, really admire what they've accomplished. One of those being, I don't know if anybody hears from Columbus, but Cameron Mitchell is a big restaurateur from there. Really admire what he's accomplished. Rich Melman, the founder of Let Us Entertain You, I really like his emphasis on experience is 51% of the business, 49% of the focus is food. So let's go people first and then product second. And then obviously Danny Meyer, it's very admirable what he accomplished with Shake Shack and Union Square Hospitality. So although I don't know those people, I've read plenty of their literature and tuned in for their interviews and podcasts, and really admire what they've accomplished.
Okay. Well, I've had multiple mentors and guiding lights throughout my career. I always like to tell people the story about my first one, which was my fourth grade teacher, a woman by the name of Ruth Gans, and I still owe her a huge, huge debt today. Back then, I thought I wanted to be an electrical engineer, and I did end up being that. And I told her one day that as an electrical engineer, I didn't need to worry about English and grammar and all of that stuff. I just need to know math. And she said to me, "You, I've got to be the stupidest boy I have ever known in my entire life." She forced me to stay after school every day, and she drilled me with English and grammar and spelling and all of those things. And that has been the biggest thing that has influenced and made an impact on my career, is my ability to communicate and write and do those kinds of things, because we all know at a point it gets to be in your career, it's more about how you can influence and communicate and move others as opposed to what you can do individually. And if it weren't for her, I probably would have cruised through just being a math guy. It would not have been able to do those things. So after I'd been out my career about 20 years, I went back home and she was retired. I took her and her husband out to dinner and thanked her. After that, I've got several general mentors. There's a guy here locally in Indianapolis named Steve Steidel. He at one time was very high up at Eli Lilly, and was also the chairman of PNC Bank, and now is the COO for a major law firm out of Chicago, actually, Amundsen Hall. And Steve took me under his wing, and he's one of the most strategic and insightful business people I have ever known. And he was the guy that I could call and say, "This is what I'm thinking, Steve. Does it make any kind of sense?" He's also the guy I call straight no chaser, and I knew that he was going to come straight at me and say, "No, that's stupid," or "Yeah, let's talk about it." So he's been a huge, huge mentor to me, and he and I still have lunch once a month to talk about what's going on with me. Then I had another mentor, Jim Shaw. And once upon a time, I was the chairman of what is now IEDC at the state of Indiana, and we hired him as the president. And Jim had been a bank president, and he actually led the organization from underneath me. And I always said to him, "Jim, you ought to be the chairman. I ought to be working for you." And I figured out his code. When he said to me, well, that's a thought, what he really meant was, boy, that's a stupid idea. But if he said, okay, let's think about that, then he meant, okay, you got something going there. We're in the right church. We just got to find the right pew. He was an extremely good mentor for me and made a lot of difference in my world. In the entrepreneurial space, it was Dick Fetter, was the dean of the business school at Butler. And I've learned a lot from him about entrepreneurship and the rules of the game, if you will. And he and I still have a relationship where he and I and another guy get together once a month and talk about business and entrepreneurship and what's going on. And he's been very influential. Then lastly, the guy who influenced me the most in the restaurant world, in addition to my brother, I just can't give my brother credit, but in the restaurant world, it was Brian Stevens, and Brian is the former president of Marco's Pizza. He actually lives here in Logansport, Indiana, and he's the founder and managing partner of Pivotal Growth Partners, the consulting group that I talked about. And Brian's background is that once upon a time, he led global franchise development for Yum Brands. And those of you who know restaurant world know who Yum Brands is. And so he has so much experience, so much insight in restaurant and franchise world that he's just been like a beacon of the lighthouse for me. So I thank all those guys for what they have been able to do and how they've been able to help me.
That's great. Those are some really great mentors. So we are going to switch gears a little bit and talk about growth. And I can't believe we're already in August, so we're past halfway through 2021. But where do you see growth in the rest of this year and beyond? And Sean, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I think we're going to start seeing smaller footprints. I think one thing that COVID really taught us is a lot of these restaurants don't need as large of a space as they've had. So especially, I'm speaking specifically for QSR and fast casual. That's my expertise is not full service. So I think that's number one. I think we'll start seeing places shrink, more drive-through heavy, more focus on that. And there's already large brands that have they've kind of announced their plans that's in their cards for the foreseeable future. I do think there's obviously going to be more of a focus on quality and trying to source responsibly and locally if possible. Chipotle does a really nice job with this. But that's obviously really important. I think you're going to start to see more localization of brands as they expand into different neighborhoods and different markets. I do think there's going to need to be some sort of common thread between the brand and then that community that can really make those folks accept and be willing to go try that brand. And Starbucks does a pretty good job with doing that, just by some of their decor. I'm not speaking specifically based on products, although that's certainly one way to do it, but more of the design elements and the branding. And then one of obviously the most, I guess, hot button topic is digital trends, with third-party deliveries and that's a whole nother can of worms there. But apps are obviously very, very important. And interesting statistic about apps and fast casual. But typically, when a consumer, I'm speaking from my Wendy's hat right now, when a consumer places an order through an app, the ticket price is typically 10 to 20% higher than it would be in a traditional go to the counter setting. And I think the psychology, this is just my opinion on this. I'm not a psychologist by any means. But when there's a line at a fast food restaurant, people kind of know what they want, but you're trying to be considerate of the guy behind you. So you don't want to sit there for, 10 minutes and really figure out everything that you want. Whereas an app, you see more people spending more time going through and customizing their selections and whatnot, which leads to a higher ticket average. So I would say those four are kind of the what I'm seeing in the foreseeable future.
Right.
I think I agree 100% with all of those things. I'd add to that um, focus. And by that, I mean, you've seen many, and I think most restaurants will now continue to streamline the menu. You won't go into that restaurant and I'll have 7 pages of menu. They have streamlined down because they don't have the resources and the capability to manage all of that in the kitchen and the ordering and all of that. So the streamlined menu and the focus on specialties or things that we're good at and where we got the most bang, I think will continue because the staffing just is not there anymore. And I think that will lead to one of the other growth things. And I think Sean touched upon it a little bit. And there's always already some trend in that world is automation inside the restaurant in terms of trying to find ways to supplement the people staff with IoT kinds of approaches and things that enable you to become much more digitally focused, to use Sean's word. The other thing that I think we'll see is um, a trend away from and a much more difficult time for the single entity operator to be viable and stay alive because the back end costs and the staffing costs are really going to begin to squeeze them. They don't have, the ability to buy at a price point to be competitive with the larger organizations and the multi-unit locations. And so I think that back end pressure, particularly what we're seeing right now with inflation and all those things, is going to make it much harder for that single entity to survive. And so we'll begin to see some consolidation and much more emphasis on the multi-unit approach to franchising, if you will. And then I think one of the last things that I'm seeing some of them as we're going around the world is you're going to start seeing more of the what I would call store within a store or multiple brands within a single location so that we can leverage the cost across both of those brands. All right, we're sharing that G&A overhead for the lease and those kinds of things, but we're still enabling ourselves to get in front of our customer. And in fact, we're expanding our reach to get in front of more customers because we're getting access to the customers who come in for the other product. And so I think we will begin to see a lot more of that happening as well. And then I think just kind of overall, to Sean's point, the dependence on digital, the ordering ahead, those kind of things, like you're seeing a lot of folks like, Panera and so forth, where, folks are now ordering ahead. You just come in, you pick it up and it's ready to go. Though that trend is going to be there and is going to go and will be something that we'll see. So those are my thoughts and my comments there.
Wayne, definitely agree with you about the concepts coming together. More dual concepts and taking advantage of more day parts.
Yep.
Breakfast concepts complementing more of the dinner day part concept. I think that's great.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. I do find it interesting. A couple of the McDonald's here have put in the digital ordering where you don't interact with a human at all.
Mhm.
And I find I try to race anybody in line to get my order in before they do. It's fast food. So a part of that is a lot of these trends have come out of the pandemic. Curious how you have seen COVID impact your business over the last year and a half.
Well, Pizza World and Marcos in particular, COVID was good for us. And the reason it was, and I mentioned earlier, our motto was already 65% carry out, 35% delivery. And so we were already set up for the COVID model, if you will. And pizza sales actually grew and increased, and it was a really good time for us. We added in, like everybody else, the touchless curbside, pickup and delivery concept. But for us, COVID was not a bad thing from a revenue side of the house. Of course, it was bad from the perspective of impact on people and customers and those kind of things. But from the revenue side, it was actually pretty good for us.
It's great. Sean?
Yeah, and from I guess wearing my Wendy's franchisee hat, it was very, very good for Wendy's. Having the drive-through, and it was record-breaking years around. So from that front, it was great. But from Fresh Stack, not having a drive-through obviously brought a lot of challenges, and it really made us focus on the revenue drivers that we have within the store. We have the in-store ordering, we have out-of-store ordering, we have third-party ordering, and we try to get scrappy. So we actually implemented a pop-up drive-through, which was never part of the business plan, but through all that, it really made us realize that it's important that we have a footprint as we grow that has the capability to potentially have a drive-through element or a pickup window in it. So obviously store one, we didn't, nobody saw COVID coming in. We didn't think we would have needed that drive-through element to combat the closures. But as we grow, obviously this thing could potentially happen again. I mean, who knows? So it's important that we use that in our models moving forward.
It's a big issue in Chicago, getting the curb cuts to get a drive-through.
It's not easy.
No.
And if you have one, you never want to give it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we talked a lot about third-party apps, and they've been quite the hot topic of discussion before COVID now, and even with the rise of ghost kitchens, it's actually a huge issue in my ward because it causes congestion. But it's interesting with the rise of ghost kitchens. I've seen a lot quicker delivery in the QSR, just my own empirical study. But I'm curious, what technology, and Wayne, I think you should lead off this discussion. Are you seeing being developed, or would you like to see developed in the franchise restaurant industry?
Okay, absolutely. And I need to say, and I should have said this earlier. My brother and I sold the territory about 6-7 years ago, so I'm not currently actively in the Marco's Pizza world, so I should probably say that. And by the way, we sold it to an ex-NFL football player, one of those folks we came across in our process that I described earlier. So just need to get that out there. It just occurred to me that I never said that in terms of my story across the way. At any rate, what we are looking at and what we're seeing, to your point, Alice, is, there's a lot more emphasis on, and I think you will see a lot more delivery-based apps coming up because, and I don't want to say those names and get in trouble with any of them, but some of the bigger platforms out there who dominate that delivery process for, individual restaurants who don't have their own capability, cost-wise and structure-wise, do not favor those restaurants, and they're going to be looking for alternatives, and there's going to be competition around how do we make that a process and a model that makes sense for us. The other thing that we're looking at and have developed with a chain that we've been working with, actually, Sean, in Columbus, around what I'm going to call the ERP for the restaurant. And so it helps us in terms of staffing and HR and the management of the restaurant and the inventory and all of the things inside of the restaurant that it takes to operate and keep the restaurant running efficiently and smoothly. And then the one that I'm really curious about and really trying to see where we can go with, and I think, Alice, you kind of alluded to that a little bit, is how do we begin to really, really effectively leverage the data that we're now capturing on our customer so that, number one, we can improve their experience in our interface with them. Number two, how we can improve, of course, our product and our offerings based on the input from them. But I think lastly, how do we then begin to most effectively structure our messaging and our branding and our ability to cross-sell, if you will. John always comes in, or Mary always comes in and gets a burger and they get this type burger and they get this kind of drink. But the folks that do that, we have found that every now and then, or most of the time, what they like to have along with it is this other item. So how do we begin to leverage that data around that customer and their wants and their needs, and begin to more effectively market and brand and position to them to increase and grow our sales, and then actually use that information to go outside our customer base, and begin to brand and position to draw in more of the customers who fit the profile or the persona of our customer. And I think you'll begin to see and start to see a lot going on in that space. In fact, there are several who are already really doing some really interesting things in that space and place. So,
Interesting. Great. Sean, what about you?
Yeah, I think and just to Alice, to kind of address one of the things that you mentioned in the question was the third-party delivery apps. I do think for us it is somewhat, I hate to say it, it's a necessary evil at this point. I think it's an opportunity that we use to kind of write it off as a marketing expense just to introduce the brand to somebody. The challenge there is just the not having control over the customer experience when they get the food, the quality of the food, the potential driver taking a trip to the gas station on the way to those things are out of our control. So it is kind of a necessary evil, but we have some thoughts on how we can, hopefully convert that customer into a direct sale versus, going through the third party app. That's a whole other can of worms. But like Wayne said, I do think technology based around prime cost management, which prime cost is labor and plus your cost of goods, is the biggest thing that could help us right now. Whether it's optimizing the labor schedule, where it could take in external factors like the weather or events in the area, or holidays, whatever it is. And I know there are some technologies out there that do this, but we just haven't found anything right now that is a great fit for us. And then also from an ordering standpoint too, something when our managers are placing orders can really help them, set par levels and whatnot as that are related to events in the future. That way, we don't walk in the cooler and we have $10,000 worth of product just sitting on the shelf. I'd say those are that would be the primary focus. I think if I could wave a magic wand and had a technology developed, it would be around our growth plan. Really taking into consideration all the inputs and the right demographic that we need, and then allow us to grow. And I know there's a couple guys out there that do it, but a lot of the data is kind of archaic at this point. The way that they do it, it's not a great. It's kind of dated the way that they do this. And I think if they had technology based more around behavioral patterns versus income levels and traffic counts and all that type of stuff, I think that would be very, very beneficial.
absolutely. I just kind of like to agree with that. And I think you're spot on, Sean. That's one of the things in the digital world and all of that they're looking at is how do you take advantage of the behavioral things that you can identify and find out in the social media space. And so that definitely is spot on.
Right. And all this technology is really exciting and can't wait to kind of see what evolves in the next few years. So we have a polling question, and we're going to deviate a little bit from the norm because we want to help Sean and Wayne kind of figure out what people's pet peeves are when they go to a restaurant. So our third polling question, actually, if you can type it in the box here with our polling, but it is, what would you like to see restaurants do differently? So what is your pet peeve? And we'll get some answers for you, for both of you, so you can hopefully use that in your businesses. Alice, I think you've got the next one.
Sure, we'll get back to that. It's interesting on the technology. I have found that many restaurants will have, 4 or 5 platforms that they sell their product on, but on busy nights, they'll turn off like 3 out of 5 of them. And there's no customization allowed, as I'm married to someone who hates mustard. So it does actually drive you to place a phone order and talk to people. But our next question is, with everything going on, what keeps you up at night? Excited to everything.
Sure. So for me right now, Delta, all the uncertainty with COVID right now, and I'm fine. Mask mandates, it's one thing. I just hope we don't get locked down again or any of that. That's
Yeah.
that's keeping me up at night right now, and also the labor market. It's very challenging right now to find good people that want to work. And for our model, we employ a lot of high school and college kids. So right now is the time that they're all going back to school, so we're going to have some turnover. So we're trying to reload our roster of talent, but it's pretty challenging right now.
Absolutely. I think, Sean, you hit the top two right there. It's the whole uncertainty of what's going on, where it's going to go, when is it going to happen, how's it going to happen, all of that uncertainty is very much at the top of the list. Labor obviously is at the top of the list. The one I'd add to that, and I don't know if that's one that you have, but the environment that we're in today, and I don't know if I call it the polarization or I call it the gotcha mentality, but I'm definitely afraid that in one of the brands, we're going to do something stupid or even unintentional that gets us on the bad list. And suddenly there's a campaign against us to, take us out of the water because those are just horrible, evil people and they don't understand. So we try to be very, very careful about what we do and what we say. The hard part is back to the uncertainty, knowing what is it going to be today that's going to be the hot button that gets you on the list. So I'm worried about that one as well.
That is a worrisome one, especially with trying to manage your social media presence, and you can't oversee every last thing that's posted. Maybe that's a technology, something that aggregates your social media and commentary.
Well, you make a good point there, Alice, because the other exposure you have, and I just didn't think about it, I was talking, is that not only is it what you do, but it's what your employees do, and you can't corral and manage all of that. So that's a real exposure.
It is, and I will go back to this, but my corner Starbucks, they had 5 people working, 4 of which were in the back hanging out together, and only one was up front taking orders and making drinks. And there was no manager there. And I thought, well, you should be able to leave your employees to actually do their job. But unless the manager was there saying, go out and do this, I think we're still going to see some labor challenges for some time to come. It's Starbucks, so does that affect their overall brand? But it does affect the customer experience. Maybe I'll walk a little farther to the next Starbucks. It's an interesting question. Christina, you're next on our next question.
Yep. So with COVID, a lot of us took up some new habits to keep us healthy during the time. And, is it anything that stuck with you? Is there anything that you do that personally to keep you happy and healthy during these times? Sean, what about you first?
Well, for me, I just had my son 4 months ago. So
congratulations.
Thank you. So spending time with him and my wife is how I de-stress. And I try to be very deliberate on the time that I spend with them, where I block off, the night. So I'm not consumed by work, where I'm able to focus and be present with them.
Congratulations, sir. For me, and it wasn't so much new. I run and I work out. I do what I call the old guy version of both of those. So running is very loosely used and workout is very loosely used. But the thing that I developed, which is new, is I started walking quite a bit during COVID. And I even started walking on my business calls while I was talking to folks. But what I got out of that is that everybody else in the neighborhood was starting to walk as well. And I met so many more of my neighbors, not only in my immediate block, but, within a mile around my house. And now I have relationships with those folks, and I continue that walk so I can stop by and chat with them, and they do the same coming our way. So that's been a really big plus for us, is that it's gotten the network or the neighborhood much more closely networked and integrated together.
That's great. Is there anything you want to keep from this time of lockdown, pandemic, or burn?
Yep. Efficiency and focus, efficiency and focus, efficiency and focus. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. Just to expand on that, operational efficiencies. As I alluded to before in my comment about P&L and trimming some of the fat, just really, understanding how to run an efficient and profitable business.
That's great.
Right. We have one final question for both of you before we get to the drawing, and that is, if you could do it all over again, would you do anything differently, or would anything change? And Wayne, I'll start with you.
Wow. I think if I were doing it all over again, I'd go for it earlier and sooner. I think I waited too long, this plus and minus, because by the time I did start, I had some quote unquote business savvy that I was able to apply. But I think had I started sooner and earlier, I would have had more time to build the momentum and achieve some of the goals that I wanted to. I think I didn't start sooner because of fear of failure. And I've now learned that it's okay to fail and it's okay to fall. You learn a bunch and you just come back stronger the next time. So I'd go out sooner, I'd go out earlier, and I would take more risk. I'd certainly mitigate it, but I'd take more risk.
And for me, I would say, and Wayne alluded to this before in his advice. It was to really spend some time with brands within that industry, wherever you're gonna either franchise or get involved, and really get exposure to them. So I wish I would have spent a little bit more time, although I've been in the industry for many years and with some great companies. I wish I would have got exposure to some other admirable companies like Chick-fil-A. I really like what they've done with their culture, and been able to take some of their best practices and applied to our business for more of an internal learning experience versus external, where I'm just kind of experiencing as a customer and somebody reading about it versus an employee.
That's great.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I can't believe we actually landed almost on the dot at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock Eastern time. This has been really edifying and enjoyable. And as always, we're so thankful for you to be here to share your experiences. And now we have our very exciting drawing, and I hope I have our winners right. Our Marco's Pizza winner is Charles Bejo, or I hope I'm saying that right. And then Fresh Stack winner is Lawrence Conrad. And Kristen Fauser will be in touch for the details on that.
And Alice, I think the Marco's Pizza is Chris Baggett. So
Okay, I said Bejo. Sorry.
Well, Chris,
Once Bejo,
congratulations,
once
sir.
All right, my first Marco's Pizza.
Oh,
Nice.
well, it's about time.
Well, this has been great. I hope everybody has a great weekend and stay safe from Delta, and get vaccinated if you haven't.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much. I
Thank you.
appreciate it.
yeah.
This was really fun. Thanks so much, guys.
Thank
All right,
you.
take care, everybody.
Good day,
Bye.
everyone.
Okay, nice to meet everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.